talk, I discuss how an examination of zombie films provides a particularly productive way of looking at the meeting between film, refugees, and migration. I examine 4 British productions in particular: Boyle's 2002 classic 28 Days Later, the sequel Fresnadillo's 28 Weeks Later, McCarthy's 2016 success The Girl with All the Gifts, and finally, Barker's 2015 work The Resort. I begin by looking at horror in general, then focus on the zombie genre and its evolution. I introduce the abject, a productive concept for looking at border crises, before discussing how the chosen films speak to contemporary concerns. Finally, I ask whether the films offer any positive vision of a future. Why choose an escapist genre rather than social realism to engage with issues of such pressing contemporary importance as migration and the refugee crisis? Realist films struggle to confront our fears and what we deny or repress. Horror explores these very things. It confronts us with monsters that embody what we fear or may even be lurking inside us. The ghost, vampire, werewolf, or zombie are radically other. But we know that if we are bitten or die, we too can become one. Monsters work at the borders of our sense of normality and show its fragility. By making the monsters our enemy and radically other to us, we reaffirm those boundaries. Zombies have roots in the Caribbean and the experience of slavery. They express the slave's fear of a loss of control of one's will and labor at the hands of the slave master. But zombie mythology was also inverted and projected back onto the enslaved as a proof of their primitivism and the need for colonial masters. In this latter form, the figure bears a repressed form of guilt around slavery and a fear of slave rebellion. Coming out of the violence of Vietnam and America's profoundly regressive racial politics, the modern zombie film was born with George Romero and his 1968 film Night of the Living Dead. Placing his next zombie outbreak in a shopping mall, Romero then targeted consumerism in his 1978 Dawn of the Dead. Zombies were now associated with contagion and could pass on their virus by biting. They swarmed in large groups, the antithesis of the Western norm of individualism. In their drive to consume, zombies pointed towards a destructive capitalist machinery driving each of us. With their vision of apocalypse, the film suggested that our society had outlived itself and was eating itself. They offered no way out. By showing a ruthless willingness to kill zombies in their radical otherness, the film suggested we were already as murderous as them, already morally dead and controlled by destructive drives. That zombie history lives on in contemporary films, even as they adapt themselves to new times. When a black woman defends herself with a machete, or an infected black soldier is chained up, we cannot help but think of slavery and its dynamics, and ask if we've really left it behind. When white authority figures drive a mixed-race zombie-human hybrid in front of them, we recognize that colonial racial hierarchies may live on. Similarly, whenever contemporary zombie film characters delight in all they can now have for free, we know too that Romero's zombie consumers are still with us. So how does the abject contribute? The abject is a concept deployed very productively by psychoanalyst and philosopher Julia Kristeva. As Kristeva notes, we typically need the reassurance of firm personal borders between inside and outside, subject and object, clean and dirty, or life and death, to maintain a reassuring sense of a bounded, stable self. When these borders collapse, when we are wounded, for example, and the inside is on the outside, we feel abject. Drooling, bleeding, dead and alive, human and animal, objects that were subjects, zombies are abject. Faced with this abjection, survivors obsessively defend and inspect bodily and spatial barriers. When barriers fall, we become homeless physically and symbolically. This can be seen in urban scenes in zombie films like 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. With their spatial zoning, their segregation between respectable and undesirable inhabitants, and the presence of symbols of identity and nation, cities offer us a reassuring sense of self and belonging. But zombies know no boundaries. When faced with their assault, urban spaces become abject, unhomely. As the link between city and people comes apart, our symbolic moorings disappear. We are homeless, refugees in once familiar spaces. This takes us to the contemporary moment and how zombie films speak to it. Zombies now run. Their speed reflects the acceleration of transport and the instantaneity of communication. In an interconnected world, fears become global. Certainly, global flows of finance, goods, people, and information are now routine. But in the shadow of these flows lurks our fear of global financial panic, pandemic, and terrorism. Fears move faster. As the neoliberal revolution continues, we fear the loss of welfare protections and stable employment. We risk becoming waste or precarious humans and feel powerless at the hands of banks and corporations. As machines become smarter and systems become ever more sophisticated, it is as if we were becoming brainless and disposable in comparison. The temptation is to call for borders and barriers so as to feel protected. By keeping out those strangers in whom we see our own disposability magnified, we feel more secure. Zombie films work through these fears, the violent reactions they can provoke, and the guilt that follows. Watching them, we identify with protected individual subjects with strong boundaries and tacitly approve of their need to kill the disposable, de-individualized, abject objects that menace them, knowing that if they break through, we too will be homeless like them, refugees and migrants in an unhomely world. But we know that protection comes at a cost. If we empathize with zombies, we may be killed. If we kill them, we lose our humanity. Either way, we become inhuman. We are not the same as we were. As defense of boundaries becomes more hysterical, we betray what we thought we were defending. Thus, in 28 Days Later, we see the country house, that symbol of traditional Englishness, mutate into an authoritarian, militarized camp, trapping those inside, as much as it excludes those outside it. In 28 weeks later, London is repopulated after a zombie outbreak, and pubs and shops are reopened. But even as the returnees explore what seems a familiar world, they find they are living in a militarized zone under constant surveillance, with soldiers looking down on them from the roofs of buildings in the financial quarter, a mute reminder of our powerlessness in the face of dominant institutions. When the outbreak returns, no longer distinct, zombies and ordinary citizens blur and all become disposable targets. The resort explicitly references refugees. It shows a world in which individualized holidaymakers exorcise their fears by shooting safely chained up zombies. The more sensitive tourists are moved by the refugees also housed on the holiday island. A little girl behind glass is a suitably cute and acceptable other. But we learn that the refugees are being used to provide fresh zombies as the old ones are destroyed. And when the zombies are unleashed, we see the girl mutate into a monster. It would seem that we can only relate to strangers as safely unthreatening others or as threats to be destroyed. We assert our humanity by the patronizing inclusion of others or their murderous exclusion. In either case, we deny them the right to be radically other than us. So, are we condemned to a zombie future that is just a continuation of the same? Is our very humanity and the binary exclusions that underpin it the problem? Laura and Embry contrast the zombie with the cyborg, as famously theorized by Haraway. Haraway sees the cyborg figure as a positive, post-human fusion that moves us beyond the destructive man-woman, person-machine, subject-object binaries that structure our world. Laura and Embry find no such positive fusion in the zombie, which remains a border figure, neither subject nor object, us nor other, and as such only embodies the futurelessness of our existing world. Perhaps we need to move beyond the human as currently conceived and rethink our world and its sustaining boundaries as a blank space, a blank canvas. The girl with all the gifts hesitates faced with this radical move. Having apparently left us nowhere to go, with its confrontation of murderous humans and hungry, brain-dead zombie adults, it offers us a post-human future with a positive fusion at its center. Mixed race, zombie human, connected to the natural life recolonizing our cities, but still able to learn, its heroism seems to hold out hope that we can begin afresh. But is this pure wish fulfillment and a denial of the truly radical potential of the zombie to force us to confront the dead end of our current civilization and the need for a more radical re-beginning?